my dam infographic, and it came from my study, actually, my 2017 master's research, and using the analogy to explain to schools what financial sustainability is. Basically, I'll move out of the way so you can see it. Water flowing into the dam is your surplus flowing in from the school, flowing into the dam, and water flowing out of the dam is what schools do with their money. And that's two things: they either invest in assets or they repay debt. So the secret to school financial sustainability, pretty simple, making sure enough's coming in compared to what's flowing out. And it really is as simple as that. And then the dam itself goes up and down as you have droughts. So, if you have a bit of a financial drought, you'll use a bit of your reservoirs. So the reservoirs, how much cash should you have available? So my research sort of gives lots of indications around that. And the actual dam name, it's actually the Somerset Dam, actually. Yeah, it was named after my great-grandfather. So he was a state parliamentarian, and he advocated for water, water conservation, water supply to Brisbane and damming at Stanley. And it took them 30 or 40 years to get it through council, but they finally did it and they named it after him. So that's how it all sort of came about.
I was going to have Buckingham Palace in my background, but
lovely.
I decided against it today. I've tried to collect the rent when I've been there, but I never got past the front gate. Funny about that.
That's no good.
Okay, well, look, I think we will start. I assume we're to start on 12 o'clock. So, firstly, I'd like to welcome everybody who's in on this webinar today. This is the fourth of our webinars we've done. The first was on web-based mapping for schools in September, one on demographics for schools in March, one on locating and energising alumni, which was in April, and obviously today's is our interview with John Somerset. All our webinars are recorded and they're available on our website if anybody wants to follow up on them. So I'm going to introduce you firstly to John. And John has been a chartered accountant with a passion for financial governance of schools for over 35 years. He's got a Bachelor of Commerce and a Master's of Business. And he's the founder and the managing director of Somerset Education. He's had a huge involvement with independent schools over the years. And the highlights to me, and I had read his paperwork that he kindly sent me, was he was director of Independent Schools Queensland for 18 years, and he was the chairman of ISQ for 7 years. He was also a director of Independent Schools Australia for 7 years, and he's then been 16 years on the board of St Stephen's in Coomera, and currently is a director of Riverside Christian College. So from an experience level, I think there is no one higher than John in this part of the field. Now, John, I just want to ask you, later life, as we both are in at the moment, you're taking on doing a PhD at present. Maybe you could just fill us in on what your ideals and what's happening with doing the PhD to start with.
Yeah, sure, Peter. Yeah, thanks for that. Struggling, trying to do my business and have a private life and also a PhD study. I pretty much dedicate my Sundays to studying on that. But I did my master's by research in 2017 and identified the attributes, 14 key attributes of a financially sustainable school. So, the logical progression is to extend that to a PhD where I'm going to test that more empirically. So, do a lot of analysis on schools and test my theories basically to prove up those 14 key attributes. And eventually come up with some sort of a method for rating schools. And one of the key attributes obviously is enrolment. So that's why I very much appreciate our relationship together. So we've got the demographics and the enrolment analysis on the Somerset portal, which is great value to the school. So thanks for that.
So what's your time frame on doing your PhD? When do you expect to complete?
I think 2024. So it takes a while. Yeah.
Work in progress, so to speak.
But it's good fun. It's good fun, actually. Yeah, because you're applying your knowledge every day in my work, and I go, oh, that'll be a really good case study, or that's interesting, and yeah, it actually stimulates you to drill down further on things in your work that you probably otherwise wouldn't do. Yeah. So Yeah, I'm loving it.
Okay, in your view, due to the COVID, what in general terms has been the impact on enrolment numbers for independent schools?
Yeah, interesting. Actually, like at the beginning of COVID, there was a lot of concern about parents having to pull out from schooling because they couldn't afford fees, or because of their businesses and so forth. But actually, the opposite has happened. Some of the reading I've read there, on average, it's about a 2.5% increase in enrolments across the board nationally in independent schools in the last 12 months, from 2019 to 2020. And some states like Queensland's documents there, I see they've had about a 4.5% increase in enrolments in independent schools. So that's been quite interesting. I think the impact hasn't been anywhere near as much financially on the parents involved in independent schools than was expected. So that's very surprising, unexpected, but a great response actually.
I think we're both probably a bit of the view that the people, by the time they've got their children at independent school, they're probably already stable in their business. But if all the young millennials and things had to put their kids, well, not have the kids, but they probably would be struggling right now with the sort of more less secure work. But I guess both are of the view that this is the stable people are already in place.
Yeah, well, I suppose you bunker down, don't you? Once you got Billy Lids children, you bunker down and get some security in your work, and so it's a different demographic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very surprising that it's up. Okay, then how do you feel? Could you share with our audience your views on education security? Do you sort of feel that? So get this. Do you sort of feel that the schools are now in more comfort, understanding that there are the parents are able to keep paying, and it's sort of much better than it was?
Yeah, we can touch on that a bit more later as well, perhaps. But as we're saying, the parents in independent schools are probably at that stage where they're well into their careers and their working life. And then if you have a look, actually, my understanding of the demographic mostly of parents in independent schools, there's professionals and there's a lot of government workers as well, and there are a lot of tradies. All of those professions are pretty much unaffected by COVID to a great extent. Obviously, if you're in or even retail, some retail has done really well, but if you're in tourism, that's a problem, or if you're in the airline industry, and there would have been some in the airline. So there are patches of parents that have been adversely affected, but by and large, the sectors of the parents that I understand have got their children in independent schools are pretty stable. But certainly the affordability of school fees is something we need to keep an eye on, because the history is, over about the last 10 years, costs have been increasing on average by about 4% per annum on average in independent schools. That has slowed a little bit to about 2% now. And of course, that's outstripping inflation. So if wages aren't going by that rate, that could affect security of enrolments in the future. But at the moment, we seem to be holding and actually improving, which is great. Did that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, I'm still just going to ask the question here. I would have always thought that the numbers would have gone down. So we're both agreeing that it's up 2.5%, and in some states it's up 4.5%.
Yeah.
So it actually means people who are probably going to send their children to government or Catholic schools have actually taken them into private schools. So I guess where we thought it was going to go one way, it's actually gone the other, but I'm not sure either of why that's happened. Do you feel more people are sort of or no longer want government schools, we're happier to go to independent school, and it's more than outweighed any economical problems?
Yeah, so I think the independent school sector, I think, has managed the flip in learning from COVID, and you would have seen that as very much so in Melbourne. Like, they were pretty much geared up, very IT literate, and everything was online and delivering online using Teams or whatever. and like most small businesses, they're able to respond probably easier than a larger organization, which takes a lot longer to move. Whereas independent schools, they are in fact independent. They're all individual schools, so their ability probably to respond quicker may have helped them. And certainly they have responded very, very, very well with their flipped learning and delivering online, etc. I think in the future, there'll be a blend of in-school and online learning. I don't think we're necessarily all going to move to online learning, but there'll be a more of a blend. And what we're doing today is typical of that. This is wonderful, being able to have 100 people online and each sitting in our own offices. That's much more acceptable and much more usable now. So I think the schools could pivot quite quickly, and maybe that's what's attracted the parents.
Of course, that increase, yeah. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because I guess if your children were at a government school and nothing much was happening, you'd be prepared to pay the difference to try and get them into the right spaces. Okay, you're the guru of financial benchmarking for independent schools. So let's talk about dollars. What's your research?
Good, I like talking about dollars.
Yeah, I gather that. What is your research showing about the changes to fees? You just touched on it there, but let's just go down a bit deeper there. So what do you think fees have been going up over the last 5 or 10 years, and what have you seen happening now?
Yes, well, in my survey, I capture information in relation to fees and grants, so total income, and I keep an eye on, I've been gathering data in the same format for basically 25 years. So I've got some really good trend information, which is why I should be doing a PhD, because I've got such good information. The trend in expenses, as I said, has been on average about 4% per annum over the last 10 years. And obviously the trend in income has been in schools has been the same. So that'd be fees and grants, probably moving by 3 to 4% per annum on average over the last 10 years. However, in the last couple of years, that's slowed right down. Like expenses have increased by about 2% per annum and income increased by about 2% per annum. Having said that, COVID's obviously had an effect, and a lot of schools are, concerned about increasing their fees so much with the pressure on the economy at the moment and businesses. So I read a report by EdStart, I think it was, and they actually interviewed or surveyed 400 odd schools, independent schools across Australia. And their research indicated that fees in 2021 on average are increasing by about 1%. So the relative increase in fees has slowed right down and come down to about 1%. I guess my concern though, Peter, is that if costs are still going by 2% and fees are only going by 1%, unless the difference is being filled by grants, what's that going to do to our operating surplus? And it's our operating surplus, as in my dam analogy, that funds the cash flow to replace assets and service debt. So I guess that's a bit of a warning sign for the future. We just need to keep an eye on that. But I think in 2021, schools have been very conservative with their either had no increases or smaller fee increases. But the average is apparently about 1%. I'll know more once I start to get that data in next year. But from that EdStart survey, that's what it indicates.
Okay. So if we're talking about looking at schools' resources and expenditure, you often use an example, I think, of a school of about 500 students as sort of call it a benchmarking starting point. You did mention, in this discussion, that you felt the staffing numbers have been changing over the period. Maybe you can expand on that for our listeners.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Peter. Yes, again, in my survey, I capture, all the staffing details broken down into administration, staff maintenance, staff, aides, assistants, teachers, etc. And if you look at it, the average independent school in Australia, if you look at the Independent Schools Australia material, is about 500 students. So if we assume 500 student school, and if we assumed half primary, half secondary, rather than quoting student teacher ratios, if we looked at that and we looked at the number of staff, total staff that a school of 500 would have had in 2009 versus 2019, the school in 2019 would have had an extra 5 staff in total. So the average cost per staff member, you could bank on, say, 100,000. With, on costs and leave loadings and casual relief, etc. So if we banked on about $100 to $120,000 average, you're probably talking about $500,000 to $600,000 worth of extra wages that an average school has got in 2019 that it didn't have in 2009. So that's obviously contributing to the average 4% increase in costs. So it's not just that wages and costs have been going up, it's because the schools have been putting in more resources, actually, more staff. And I know that there's been quite a significant increase in special assistance staff and so forth in schools. So the aides and assistants and also special assistance staff has increased, and also teaching staff generally, but it's probably more in the administration and special assistance area that staff have increased. But so that 4% per annum increase on average in cost, some of that's going to be a real increase in cost per staff member and other costs, but actually probably the lion's share of it's actually extra staff in the school, which hopefully is adds to the service being provided as well. So perhaps that might need to slow down going forward. So if we're only getting 1% increase in fees, maybe we need to start thinking about how can we run our schools differently into the future and look at the strategy into the future. And and we know we've got a potential teacher shortfall coming as well. So how are we going to manage for that? I like to do an Edward de Bono and think about what if, how can we do things? So how can we run schools without staff? Well, we can't, obviously, but how can we think that through and think how can we do things more efficiently into the future, which keeps a cap on our costs. Also, the fact that we just mightn't be able to find the qualified staff in the future. So it's a bit challenging, but interesting as well.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I guess I'm still thinking about. You obviously feel that this isn't so much teaching staff. If you thought of your extra 5 teachers, if you had to sort of grade it between how much has gone into administration, how much is actually face-to-face or improving the quality of the teaching, are we still at the sort of scenario where administration's maybe growing and we're creating, or the system's got so much better that administration numbers per student are coming up or down? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I know what the figures are. Looking at the movement in staff, it's actually in the non-teaching staff where it's mostly increased. So it's the administration, it's the special assistants, it's the aides, it's all those other areas. Some of the requirements for capturing student data has increased so much too. So certainly there has been some increase in teacher numbers, but it's probably weighted more towards the non-teaching staff that these extra 5 people are coming from.
And is this often bureaucracy that's coming from government and things like that, or is it?
Yeah.
Because I've also laughed sometimes when people tell me systems are more efficient and all you find out you're doing is just pushing paper around a circle. My wife's an ex-nurse, and administration around medical things now is incredible compared to what it used to be, and all of the new nursing things of hospitals, it's all going into administration. Do you feel there's anything noted in your research to that sort of thought?
Well, not so much in my research, but just anecdotally talking to schools, like certainly the students with special needs has increased in all sectors, the state and the independent sector. And the management of that is very administratively heavy, as is if you're applying for special assistance grant income, the assessment of the needs and capturing that data and then reporting that to government to get that little bit of extra grant money to help look after that student, that's very significant in schools. And also trying to move more and more to individualized learning, so analysing how individual students are performing and then tailoring the delivery to them. I mean, IT has certainly improved significantly in that area as well, but I think administration, it's in these other areas that have really forced the extra staffing in schools.
So you probably, I guess your advice if schools are looking at keeping controls on their costs is really to keep a very awareness of this extra creeping staff sometimes, and can often be put on for administration purposes, but the weight of what the benefit compared to the cost could always be a bit of an issue.
And also looking at automation, like a lot of the software that you can get now can automate a lot of things. So I was talking to a school the other day and they said, oh, we automated such and that saved one full-time equivalent by automating. So I think we need to look at, automation and artificial intelligence as best we can. Because I think, even for the love of money, you won't be able to get staff is what I'm concerned about going forward, in the sector. I mean, also in the education sector, totally.
Okay. So Spectrum and Somerset are both data collectors and analysts. How many schools do you now have? And can you just give us a quick brief of what you collect and what you do with it, and just how much involvement there is? How many schools are involved at this stage of what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I've been running the survey for about 25 years now. And in the last few years, there's been between 600 and 700 schools submit data through an online portal on my website. Based on independent schools, of that, there's about 550 independent, and then some are Catholic systemic. Based on enrolments, they represent about 70% of the market in the survey. So it's very, very solid data based on enrolment data. It's good statistical information. So I capture information that the schools need to produce for the government. So their financial questionnaire data and also their census data. So it's captured very consistently and has been captured exactly that way for 25 years. So that's why the data is very robust. And when you select a sample of schools, you've got a pretty good sample there to select on. So I calculate, 60 different ratios, of which, half a dozen or a dozen are the most important ones on operating surplus, debt per student, staffing ratios, all of that type of material. So does that sort of answer your query? Or?
Yeah, but okay, so I'm familiar with benchmarking because of my old work in the oil industry, but my understanding, or clear understanding in your things, is you grab this 600 schools, you grab a packet of data, and then each school that is a participant can then compare themselves to a pool or to a group of similar schools. Would that be, and look at and maybe you can just explain what benchmarking, I know a lot of people on are probably business managers.
Yeah.
But let's just go back a step and just explain why benchmarking can be so valuable.
Yes, well, actually, in my master's research and certainly in my PhD research, benchmarking is coming up as critical and crucial attribute of a financially sustainable not-for-profit and school. So it's basically like, for instance, if I said I had $1 million worth of debt in my school, that doesn't really mean much. But if I said my debt per student was $15,000 and I knew the average debt per student in a school was $8,000, then I instantly know, gee, my debt's relatively high. So you can compare yourself with that sample average of similar schools. You do the same thing with your income per student, your expenses per student, your operating surplus. So you can make, which is our fiduciary and statutory duty, you can make an informed decision in relation to your relative financial health. So with the survey, the schools go on, they put their data in, takes them about an hour, I suppose, to put it in. They can then select the sample of schools by ticking a number of different criteria. And it goes, okay, I've got 5 schools that match that criteria. So I might say, can I have all P to 12 schools in Queensland that have income between $20,000 and $30,000 that have students between 500 and 750? And I go, bang, there's a sample. It'll calculate the 60 ratios for that sample average. It'll calculate my school's ratios, and then it will compare. And the report, plots them in graphs, puts in standard paragraphs, puts in ticks and crosses. It really does pretty much a lot of the analytics for them. You don't even need me to do that. And that's why it can be done quite efficiently, because I've in fact automated it over the years. So, and yeah, very, very powerful then. It helps inform strategy actually, once you've got that information.
So again, with school governance, I'm often talking with businesses around this, about sort of the board having responsibilities. Having your type of work brought in, benchmarking, things like this, really would should make a board feel a bit more comfortable about the decision process that is backed off facts and data rather than a bit of wet finger in the air, I would think. Would it be how you'd look at it?
Yeah, absolutely. I always remember when my kids were in primary school, I'm the local accountant. I ended up treasurer of the outside school hours care because I had accountant after my name. And I had absolutely no idea how we were supposed to be trading. And I just made as much money as I could. As it turned out, we made heaps and we managed to put in air conditioners and build extra buildings. But I didn't actually know relatively how I was meant to perform, what my staffing was meant to be compared to similar outside school hour care services. That's exactly what this does for schools. So a board can look at it and go, okay, I know that my debt's relatively high or my staff's relatively high or low. I can then make an informed decision on an action to be taken based on that. So rather than, finger in the air, you've actually got a sample of similar schools that you can compare with and make that informed decision, which is, in fact, their statutory and fiduciary duty as a board member. So yeah, it helps you make some tough decisions sometimes. And I often, when I'm running ratios for a school, I can say, okay, well, let's look at your staffing levels, for instance, compared to what they would have been if you're at the sample average. And there's a tool on my website that allows them to do that. And, I was talking to a school not that long ago, and they had like 20 more staff than the average school similar to them with identical enrolments. So now the board are quite informed. They know exactly. And I'm not saying you have to reduce the staff to that, but at least they know where their unders and overs are, and they can make an informed decision on whether they want to do or need to do anything about that.
I was also interested, when I first met you a couple of years ago, you were running all over Australia doing many, many board meetings and helping a lot of schools. You made the comments to me, I think recently, that now with everybody being so much more familiar with Zoom and these sort of things, you're still able to probably offer more assistance, but without having to race all around Australia, which means your time can be much better spent. Would that be a fair assessment?
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. If I had to fly to Melbourne for a presentation, well, you really take 3 days out of your diary, for a 1.5 hour meeting, because you've got to prepare, you've got to get down there, you've got to deliver, then you've got to come back, then you've got to recover from the flight. And as we get a little bit more mature in our ages, it takes a little bit more to recover. But, I can do a video presentation like this, and it's much more efficient, affordable for the school, and it doesn't take as big a toll on me either. And actually, I enjoy it because I've got things on my screen. I can bring things up and go, now look at this document and look at that, et cetera, et cetera. It's much more interactive and very much more acceptable now to schools, and I think much more efficient. So actually, this has been a big benefit of the change in operations for me and for the schools, hopefully. So I generally now do about 30 or 40 presentations to school boards a year, whereas there's no way in the world I could fly around the country doing that many previously.
So I don't know about you, but I haven't been on an aeroplane since January last year, and I haven't missed it. But compared to normally being away 4 nights a month for the best part of 40 years. So it's amazing how we all change. Now, I just want to bring on, you do a blog, and I assume, and we will bring it up anyway, but obviously John's website is somerseteducation.net. But you bring up, and Sue will have that, we'll come on with that near the end. But you did a blog in March and you called it 3 Steps Towards Financial Sustainability. Now, you might like to expand on what your thinking was, because it's obviously been picked up by quite a lot of people.
Yeah, that was well received by the subscribers there. Yeah, basically, the 3 steps to financial sustainability, I think, basically identify where you are at now financially, so your strengths and your weaknesses. So using the dam analogy in behind me here, what's your level of debt? So how big's your floodgate for debt repayment? What's your need for asset replacement? What's your relative surplus flowing into the dam each year? And what affects that service is your relative income and your relative expenses, which is affected by staffing. So use the survey, basically, the benchmarking tool, to analyse and dollarise all those strengths and weaknesses, and then use that to inform strategy. So take that, and I did a presentation in another state a couple of months ago, where I analysed the school with their sample averages, and an hour and a half presented to the board and senior management, and then from that they had some real hard data to then spend the rest of the day strategic planning and using that data, so they know where their strengths and weaknesses are, what level of debt they could afford, what levers they can pull and push to increase the surplus if they need to borrow more money to service it, et cetera, et cetera. So use that information to identify and quantify your strengths and weaknesses, then inform strategy. And then once they've settled on their strategy, dollarize it, put it into a long-term budget model. 10-year, I've got a 10-year budget model that we produced, and then analyze the ratios on that. And then once you've done that, stress test it. So, okay, what if our enrolments were 10% less than what we were expecting? How do our ratios look then? Can we survive, et cetera, et cetera? So basically, firstly, analyze your strengths and weaknesses using the survey, use that to inform strategy, and then dollarize your strategy and then stress test it. So yeah, pretty straightforward process, really. And the tools are all there, and a lot of the tools are designed to be, very much, self-service, and I like to teach the schools how to use them rather than me doing all the work for them. I'd rather, teach people to fish rather than do the fishing for them.
So one comment was, how critical, in your view, is it for schools to continually assess where and who their students are?
Wow.
What's your thoughts on how often what should they be doing in that space?
Well, Peter, that's exactly why we've got this great alliance with you and Spectrum. It really adds value for the schools. So for schools that are not in the survey, if you're in the survey, you get access to some demographic geomapping on our website. There's a complimentary version, and then there's a small fee-based version which gives you a bit more information on demographics you can look at, and Peter can talk more about that. But look at, the school-age population between, was it 2020, Peter, and 2036. So you can look by basically your postcode areas. So it gives you, it's giving you a tool, a very efficient tool to look at your potential supply of enrolments into the future by area. But we also need to not just look at supply of enrolment or demand for possible demand for enrolments into your school, but we also need to look at affordability. So I think the demographic analysis is both supply and demand of future enrolments, but also, can they actually afford the school fees into the future? So it's two-pronged, that enrolment analysis, and enrolments drive everything in schools. It's a crucial driver. And I know in America, they're getting quite sophisticated, which I'm sure Peter can do, looking at, they look at their discounts and the discounted fee and their full fee as a percentage of the income, Peter, by the demographic area that they're drawing their students out of. So they can sort of work out, okay, well, there's a whole lot of future enrolments here, but can they actually afford the fees? So look at fees as a percentage of income in that area. Very, very smart. And we may need to move to that more so into the future, get more sophisticated with that into the future. So does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, no, I think, and it was interesting, your comment, we did talk about this earlier, is in Australia, though, we're much more, I call it homogenous, we're much more even the difference between a Toorak and somewhere out the west of Melbourne or somewhere in the southwest suburbs of Sydney compared to, Vaucluse. The income difference might be double. Maybe it's because the people in the Vaucluse and the Tooraks manage to hide income better in trusts and all those sorts of things, but who am I to say? But the point in America is it is very much literally low socioeconomic area, high socioeconomic area, and it's a ratio of like 4 or 5 times the average income in the Afro-American area of LA compared to the Hollywood Hills would be a factor of 20 times different. So you really can distinguish exact areas there where it's probably not quite as, black and white here in Australia, where some areas are really low and others are really high. But I think we are going to be heading that way a bit more. And I guess federal government are doing a bit of that with the way they're trying to work at their funding and have been for a long time.
Yes,
okay.
So yes, to answer your question, enrolments are crucial, and that's why it's one of the key attributes that are in my research, but it's also on the website. through spectrum. So very, very important.
Okay, well, look, I'm going to say thank you so much for coming on to do this webinar with us. And what I'm going to do is ask Sue Elston and Dorianne Lyons, who work with me, to come on now and run. They've had some questions and things have been popping through, and maybe they can address us on what questions are up, and let's aim them at John and see what the thoughts are. Sue and Dorianne, if you can come up, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thanks, Peter.
Okay.
I'll let you go first, Dor.
Sure, no problem. Thank you, Sue. Okay, so John, there was a question posed by Hugh, and it relates to, I guess, giving some guidance around what individual schools' target should be when they're setting fees. So the question was, fees affordability being a key driver to enrolments, what range, in your experience of fees, as a proportion of the average household income, do you recommend for individual schools to target?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Hugh. And I don't think there would be many schools in Australia doing this yet, but from my American seminar, I attended an American seminar virtually in February, which was brilliant. I have got some figures on that. So they looked at, and I've got them here, excuse me if I look down here, because I think this is where we're going in the future. So they looked at their full fee as a percentage of the household income in the particular geographic areas that they're pulling their students from. And then they looked at their discounted fees as a percentage of, so, and obviously they're monitoring their discount levels. And in America, discount levels on fees and concessions are increasing, as it is in Australia. In fact, from my survey, in 2009, the average concessions as a percentage of fees was about 9%. And by 2019, it's grown steadily to 12%, and where's that going in the future? So 12% is the average in 2019 anyhow, average concessions as a percentage of fees. But to answer your question more specifically, I've got some figures here. In America, from the seminar I attended, they're looking at their full fees. Their prep were about 13% of the average household income. Their primary were about 21% of average income, and their secondary about 33% of average income in that area. That's on their full fee. But when they looked at their discounted fee, and they tend to focus more on discounted fees rather than their full fees, those figures were 13% for prep. So obviously they don't discount prep much. 10% of household income in primary and 13% of household income in secondary. So that's sort of the percentages. I'm not aware, Peter, you might be aware in your demographic work that we're doing much of that at the moment, but I suspect we'll probably move to that more so in the future. It's a big thing in America and quite sophisticated, but of course in America, they have absolutely no government funding, whereas on average here we get 50% of our income from government grants. So, so it's fees, and the dynamics are a little bit different in their independent sector over there. So hopefully that answered your question here.
John, can I just ask you another question related to that? Is that based on how many students going to the school?
I don't know. They're just looking at their, like, for instance, they'll work out what their average discounted fee is for secondary, and then take that as a percentage of the household income in that geographic area. So they're saying 13% is the average, discounted fee as a percentage of household income in that area. So they use that to assess, okay, well, that area can afford our fees, but that area is 25%. So maybe they can't afford our fees. So we won't focus our marketing on that area. We'll focus it on that area. So it's more their fees as a percentage of income or affordability. It's getting quite sophisticated. If you had 6 kids
there, that would be, a lot more than 13% of your income potentially at the same school. So if you had 100 grand for the whole year, and it was 15 grand for each student, and 6 students, you wouldn't have much left over at the end.
Yes, I think we're looking at it from 2 different points of view. What they're looking at is the face value of their fee. So a single fee. So if their single fee was $13,000 was their discounted fee, and the average household income in that particular geographic area was $100,000, they say, well, our discounted fee is 13% of the average income in that area. So you're assessing fee affordability for a particular geographic area. So not really looking at total fees or anything for the school. They're looking at individual affordability of their individual fees. Sorry if I'm not explaining that well.
Yeah, so essentially it's for one student.
It's for one student, effectively. Their
Yeah.
discounted fee for one student, yes.
Yeah. Cool.
I just want to make a comment that in our projects, and as you know, we've done 20 or so in the last year or two, we've never actually gone in and asked the school to say, well, actually define which children are and where they come from for the discount factor. And maybe it's something that we could do, or maybe it's a bit too confidential and schools don't want to go down that way. But it would be something that's quite not that difficult to do by the time we've mapped where all the students come from. We've already run what we call CEFA, Socioeconomic Index for areas, which is, in my view, a better measure than average household income, because CEFA is trying to accommodate for where an area is might have very high rentals, so your cost of living is going to be more there, where somewhere lower living, you can actually live with a lower average household income because your other costs aren't so high. So CEFA tries to weigh that out when you're comparing, say, suburbs in the northern suburbs of Adelaide to suburbs in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. It tries to balance it out a bit. But we always do map in and show the CEFA layers and show what the CEFA scores are for different areas around the school. But we've never gone the next step of actually saying, right, which kids get a discount and how do you want to measure that? That's an interesting point. And
I think we're going to have to be looking.
Follow America.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to be looking more at that, Peter, because, you know, we talked before about costs in independent schools are increasing. And if we're only increasing our fees by 1%, if that continues, that trend, then obviously if our costs are going higher than our income, eventually our surplus is going to crunch. So we need to keep the enrolments up. So we might have to do some more discounting. I don't know. So it's just going to be a little bit, probably we're going to increase our sophistication going forward in relation to that, and probably follow the Americans a little bit more on that, I think.
Well, it's actually quite doable from our side of the
Yeah, I'm sure it would be.
But as I said, we've never asked a school to actually tell us which kids are getting the discount. The funny thing we have done, though, is when we've introduced our web-based mapping, I remember one school telling me how it's very handy, because when they've had the parent ring up and say, oh, look, school fees are a bit high and it's all a bit tough, they said the first thing we now do is we jump on the web-based mapping, we use Street View, we look at the house they live in, and sometimes we suggest they, cancel the tennis court coach and the pool cleaner, and maybe that might help generate a little bit more money to pay for your school fees. So the web-based mapping actually allows you to look at the house the child lives in, and you make your own judgment after that.
It's amazing.
So,
I love playing with your software. I can sort of zoom around and see where the different areas are. It's very quite interesting.
There was another question that we had here, John, for you.
Sure,
and this relates to your, I think, the reports that produced or found on your website. It's from Christine. Do you have to be an accountant or have an accounting background to understand the reports that the school's financial survey report, John?
Yes. I'll start by answering that question with a little secret, just between me and the 100 odd people that are online, or 50 that are left now. There was only one subject I ever failed in my entire life, and it was accounting.
Okay.
So, because I didn't do accounting at school, and I went to university, and the lecturer said, look to the left here, look to the right of you. One of you is not going to be here at the end of the year. Well, that was me. I just didn't know. They were just gibbering away in this foreign language. So I actually know what it's like to not understand the stuff. So, obviously I recovered from that and learned it and did well from then on, but it was actually probably the best thing that happened to me. So my reports are written very much so that non-financial people can interpret them. Because of that, I've been in that seat. I know what it's like. So I try and, the reports have got ticks and question marks to say this is good or question. It's got paragraphs in there for the people that like words rather than numbers. It's got graphs in there that people prefer graphs rather than numbers or words. And actually that damn infographic is on page 2. it pulls data out of financial data out of the report to sort of try and bring it to life in a picture as such for the school. So I'm very, very passionate about trying to, distill the information in a non-accountant terminology so that non-accountants can follow it. Because in the end, most of the people on our school boards are non-accountants, and they need to understand this stuff to make the informed decisions. So
yeah,
it's a particular passion of mine, Dorianne.
That's
so
good to hear.
I assume a lot of the people you deal with, we tend to be dealing with enrolment managers and people like that. You would tend to deal more with the business manager though, wouldn't you, John?
Probably more so with the board, actually. So the board, the principal, the business manager, so senior management and the board is really who I'm dealing with. And, I've been a board member on a school for over 20 years. So I know what it's like to sit on that side of the table. And I'm still a board member, obviously, but it's mostly with board members, and it's getting, and the board members, governance 101, you can't leave the financial stuff to the accountant. If you're on the board, you all have to have a level of understanding. So what I try and do is present information in a format that actually we can all understand and really understand. And from the accountants on the board, it makes it better because the accountant doesn't have to make all the finance decisions because actually everyone's on the same page. They do actually understand it. So it's something I'm very passionate about, actually.
I guess level of governance, I've noticed one of the things you're always pushing is proper governance for schools. And I remember from some experiences I've seen where, people thought it was great to be on a board, it looked good on a bit of a resume, but they don't realise that they actually have liability and can be brought up. And a friend of mine was of a major thing that went down, and, some other people who were on it was a military type of club, and they were just on it for, it looked good. And then next thing there was potential that they could have all had to put in serious money. And he said you couldn't have seen them getting off quicker if you believed. And he had to explain to them that once you're on, you can't just jump off because you don't like the look of things.
Yes. And actually, you asked me about my research, and that's actually one of the things that has consistently coming through in the research over the last 50 years. You can have all these financial ratios and so forth, but it's actually the ability of the board to understand it and act on it. So it's very important that the boards are have some sort of financial literacy training, and the information's, and that's what the business managers can do, is distill the information in a format that the boards can digest it. But I know what you're saying there.
And we have another comment from Peter Waters, who said that some admin staff increases at our school as a result of a program to remove routine admin tasks being done by teachers.
And that could be the case too. But because teacher load it is increasing, and the administration required for that. So you could have a teacher doing it at an average cost of $130,000 per teacher, effectively, with on costs and so forth. Or you have an administration person can do it at $70,000 or $80,000, including on costs per person. So it's more efficient to do it that way. And the teaching professional can be doing what they do best, which is the teaching. So and that's probably why admin staff have increased in schools, because it's mostly been, coming back to that discussion we had earlier, Peter, it's mostly been in the non-teaching staff that the extra staff have increased.
Another question I'd actually like to ask personally, there's another question after it, is there a trend in independent schools to casualise the workforce? Because I know that this has been something that's been done a lot in the university sector. So although the full-time equivalent, they might have 60,000 staff at a university or whatever, I'm just making some number up, but the actual full-time equivalent could be 20,000. So are you noticing a trend in casualisation of staff in independent schools?
Yeah, I don't ask that question in my survey, so I'd really be making up the answer, I think, in relation to casualisation. I can't answer that because I don't actually ask the school, are they permanent or full-time equivalent or casual. I do just ask for full-time equivalents, which is exactly what they put in the Commonwealth Census in August, full-time equivalent staff. So I don't know to what extent it's being casualised.
Is it something you could add to your survey, or does that sort of corrupt the data because you haven't got it for 25 years?
Well, I could add, but I try and, the survey is based on standard definitions as defined by the federal government for their financial questionnaire and their mid-year census, their August census. I find with 20, and Peter would find it too, after 25 or 30 years of doing benchmarking, if you say to someone it's black, you'll have someone say it's grey, and you'll have someone say it's red, and people just interpret things in different ways. It's quite wonderful the way the mind works. So I really just keep to the standard government definitions. That way I know I've got consistent data captured in a consistent way over the last 20 odd years.
Yeah, and something that they can easily find without having to dig too deep, which, you know.
Exactly. And when they hover over the questions on the survey, it actually has got the government definitions there. So, and now we're in New Zealand, and I've got another school in Asia. We're using the same definitions.
B. Smith and I both confessed that we've also failed accounting.
No.
So I thought that was interesting. I actually turned out to be very good at accounting, but because I hate it so much, I do other things. So that's interesting.
Don't tell too many people that I fail, will you?
Well, yeah.
We'll keep it a secret, John. We won't share it very much.
Don't share it with anyone.
No, we'll try not to.
But I think it makes it real for people. You know, I actually know what it's like to not understand this stuff that we gibber on about.
Yeah.
I actually get that.
Alistair Lee, who's a great supporter of ours, has also mentioned it's a great presentation. So I've enjoyed the banter. It's been really lovely. And B. Smith also has given you a plug, a timely reminder to get on with 2020 data with John's survey and access to Peter's demographic offering and some future demographic trends. So we'll just pay you later, B. Smith, for that nice little plug in the chat there. Very good. And Dor, do you want to ask the next question?
Yes, it's not a question as such. It's just a reminder to everyone who's tuned in today. Someone has had to depart and has sent an email asking if the recording will be shared, and 100% we will be sharing the recording with everyone today once we finish the webinar. So you'll receive an email to your inbox with the registered email address that you had. And if there is anyone that you would like from your office or from your personal life to receive the recording today, just send me a message and I will be able to share the recording.
Sorry, I was probably a bit ignorant earlier in this because the two ladies didn't have their cameras on, but Dorianne is a business development manager with Spectrum Analysis now. She has a background of working at Deakin University for many years, and she's really jumping on board to help us expand out with our schools. And Sue Elson is probably known to a lot of you. She's spoken at a lot of conferences, including Educate Plus, conferences like that. And she is the guru of social media and especially LinkedIn. And she always helps us run these workshops, but she also did the last one, which was the one on alumni, because we're really trying to help schools understand how they can join in with their alumni and make them better for the long term. So her part of that was very much on getting the LinkedIn and your social media side all working really properly. So thank you very much, ladies. You do a fantastic job on getting these workshops and seminars up and going.
Now I've got an extra long question from Sarah Beresford that's just come through.
Okay.
So thank you for typing this out, Sarah. Ratios are essential to busy school leadership teams and board members and help to compare their school against the sample average. However, these same boards reduce costs by making non-teaching staff redundancies to match the benchmark without boards first considering their older platforms or systems being used by those staff and the staff's reduced productivity because of those outdated or cumbersome systems. For example, systems that save time and dollars by better stewarding donors or driving marketing automation for communications engagement across social media and parent communications. So much is spent using external agencies and designers. It's key to have benchmarks to guide decision-making, but it's also key to have commercially astute school leaders with non-teaching backgrounds who can inform the school's council or leadership team of efficiencies that could be achieved by improving school platforms and systems. I've actually got a personal example of this. I was working with a school and they spent $15,000 on a campaign to be on a local property website and they got not one lead out of it. And I suggested to them if they'd spent that $15,000 supporting initiatives at their feeder schools, they would have got a lot more bang for their buck. So, you know, sometimes recruitment and retention of retaining families and looking after them can be more effective than trying to find new ones. Anyway, Sarah's question: does your data provide a benchmark to quantify the impact from investing in best practice platforms?
Probably not really, because it's analysing the school's historical data, but you can put in, I have got information there where you can put in future budgeted data going forward and compare yourself, your trend and your performance going forward. And what is best practice? Yeah, I guess I never say thou shalt, you know, adjust this or adjust that. It's just really saying, here's you and here's the average, so you can make an informed decision. And the decision might be, and I've been sitting with schools that, okay, our financial performance is here and the average is here, but that's okay. You know, more money is not necessarily better, because schools are beautifully complicated things. We're educating young minds. It's not about making more money at all, but you need an amount of money to be able to educate those minds. So it's how you're investing that money. And some schools with less need for capital or debt servicing can operate on a lower margin so they can have more staff. So I never say thou shalt be here or be there. And one thing that's come through the research too is, you know, the least financially healthy school may still be viable and sustainable. You don't actually have to be the most profitable or the most financially healthy, so long as you're healthy enough to run your strategy and your mission. And that's all about mission. And so it's about informing strategy. And one of the things I came across in my research is a great framework for assessing, okay, we've got a pot of $10 million. How are we investing that strategically? And we might choose to invest it in, you know, those initiatives. So yeah, I never say thou shalt be here or be there. It's just really, are we to make an informed decision on where they're at relatively, and then strategically, you know, is that a worthwhile investment in that particular area? Yes, it's costing us money, but it's getting us outcomes in the children or in the enrolments or whatever the case is. So I don't know whether that really answers the question. Hopefully it does to an extent, but I'm not about making more money for money's sake. Certainly the systems can make schools more money, but it's about making that money to invest it strategically. That's the whole crux of the whole thing. And our ultimate outcome is the outcomes of the kids. And corny as it may sound, you know, I think that makes a real contribution to Australian society, you know, if we can do that. So that's really where I'm coming from. It's the quality of the outcomes.
You know, from my perspective, having worked with a number of different schools, I see some schools with their head in the sand, this is too complicated, we'll just pay somebody else to do it. And I see other schools who say, we're going to try and understand this, see what we can manage ourselves, what systems we can put in place, and how we can sort of work collaboratively to have the best outcome for everybody. So they get that expert advice, but they don't, you know, take it all on board themselves entirely, but they still have ownership of it. And I think that when you give away ownership, you end up paying an awful lot of money for these things.
And so the outcome is you know, of the child, of the student when they go out the door, you know, how are they well prepared? So it's not financial. No, but you know, so the money is just the enabler for that. That's the way I see it anyhow.
Yeah, but you don't want your school to close, and there's been a few of those in Melbourne, and you know, other campuses pick them up and all sorts of things, and the real estate becomes more valuable. Yeah, you definitely don't want to be in those situations.
No.
And, yeah. B. Smith has also asked, Fair Work has influenced casualisation to become less in school, as many casuals keep coming back into schools for more than 1 year. So I don't know whether you're across that topic or not.
No, I'm not really involved in it.
Yeah, okay. We've got just reminders there. So in the chat, if you haven't seen it already, Dor has put in lots of little links to where you can find us online. So we're all on LinkedIn. John has videos on Vimeo. We have videos on YouTube. And we're also, Spectrum Analysis is also on Facebook and Twitter. So if they're your preferred platforms, you can check us out on there. And we definitely encourage you to follow us, because we're always adding new stuff there for schools and other enterprises, but, you know, always with a focus on providing education, not just sales pitches. So we're very keen to share that knowledge. So Dawn's put up the final thank you message. I'll let you two lovely. Is there any other thoughts you had, Dawn? Otherwise, we'll close off with Peter and John.
No, that's all from me.
Okay, well, look, I'm going to thank everybody. Now, I am here in Melbourne, as you probably know, so I should have my face mask on after this. And we even have our new check-in code. So we could really frustrate the government by getting everyone to check in from interstate so they're in our office, but we don't need to do that. So hopefully we're going to come out of lockdown and get back into action. But look, thank you so much, John, for making your time available. We now know where Somerset Dam is, and we know the logic behind it. As I said, my Buckingham Palace isn't on at the moment. But look, thank you so much for joining us. And to everybody who's been on board, hopefully you've benefited from this. And as the girls said, the websites and the video will be sent around to everybody. And look forward to speaking with you in the near future. We aim to run one of these type of workshops approximately every 2 months, and we'll think about what our next one is going forward, because we haven't quite done that. So this was the third of our series. So thank you once more, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you.
Marianne. Good fun.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.